Lep pozdrav strani ekipe Slovenske kinoteke. Danes je en prav poseben večer, sestavljen iz dveh delov, iz predavanja, ki se bo osredotočilo na študijo restavriranja enega samega filma in potem sledi tudi ogled tega filma ob 8, tako da vas že zdaj vabim, da ostanete. Te dva dogodka oba sta nastala v sodelovanju s Francoskim inštitutom za kulturo, za kar se inštitutu lepo zahvaljujem. Z nami je Simone Appleby, ona je vodja laboratorija za film in digitalno restavriranje pri francoskem nacionalnem centru za kinematografijo in animirane podobe. Študirala je fotografijo in to je bil tudi nekako njen začetek zaljubljenosti v film. Ima več kot 20 let izkušenj na področju postprodukcije. Delala je tako rekoč z vsemi možnimi formati filmskega traku in tudi z digitalnim filmom. Med drugim pa se ukvarja tudi z montažo negativa, tako je sodelovala kar z nekaj znanimi režiserji, med njimi pri filmu Podlih 8 z Quentinom Tarantinom in pri Oppenheimerju z Christopherjem Nolanom. Namen njenega obiska v Ljubljani je nekako dvojen. Eden je seveda to predavanje, nekako za strokovno in tudi, kako se temu reče, laično javnost. Drugo pa je, gospa Appleby je obiskala Slovenski filmski arhiv pri Arhivu Republike Slovenije, potem RTV Slovenijo, Slovensko kinoteko in pa studio oziroma laboratorij Teleking, tako da je dobila nekako nek vpogled, na kakšen način in kje smo mi trenutno na področju digitizacije in digitalnega restavriranja svoje filmske dediščine, tako da bo, kar je detektirala in kar bo morda se zdi, da bi bili nekako smiselni in dobri koraki, da naredimo par korakov naprej na tem področju, pa bo jutri spregovorila na sestanku z ministrico za kulturo in njeno ekipo. Tako da upamo, da bo to en res poriv naprej, da se končno stvari, ki so trenutno malce v praznem teku, spet zaženejo. To je pravzaprav vse, kar sem jaz želela povedati, razen še enkrat, da vas vabim tudi na ogled filma, za katerega je bila napisana prav posebna na novo partitura skladatelja in multiglasbenika Iztoka Korena. Mislim, da bo to zelo lepo doživetje. Zdaj pa, without further ado, I would like to invite Miss Simone Appleby to the stage, and the stage is yours.
Good evening. So firstly, I would like to thank the Kinoteka, Igor and Jenya, for inviting me to this beautiful city and to your wonderful institute, and to be able to present this film with you tonight and talk a little about it. I apologize in advance. I'm not a film historian, so I will not be able to talk to you in exact detail about the entire production of this film. I have a few key points to discuss about the film. So the PowerPoint will be in two sessions, two parts. First one, I will talk a little bit about the two producers who managed to make this film. And then I will talk mainly about the restoration. I'm the head of the lab. Jenya said that. I'm sorry, my Slovenian is not up to scratch. I need to practice. But this is more my field, and I'll be able to talk to you more in detail about that. So just before I go on to that, I just want to present very briefly who we are at the CNC in the archive. We were created by the cultural minister in 1969, André Malraux, and we celebrated in 2019 50 years of our coming to being. And we have, over the years, thanks to voluntary and legal deposits, collected over 140,000 films, which represents around 1 million film cans. That makes us the third largest archive in the world after Goss Film Fund and the Library of Congress in the United States. Our missions are to conserve, to document, to restore, and to give access to the widest audience possible of all the films that we have. Right now, we've digitized around 13,000 film titles. When I say digitize, that means give access. It does not mean in enough quality to be able to restore. It's not long-term preservation. And we've preserved around 16,000 titles photochemically. So you can see that there's still a long way to go, and there'll be a few lifetimes ahead of those to take over. So just to talk a little bit about the two producers, because these were an actual remarkable duo of entrepreneurs who actually made this film possible. So the Sultan de l'Amour tells the story of a love affair between a princess, Douala, and the Prince Murad, who they meet anonymously. And the story is all the more complicated when she's kidnapped by the nasty prince, which is the Sultan Malik, where he repeatedly abuses her because she rebukes his love for her. And then the whole adventure is whether or not she will be rescued in time by the Prince Murad. But before I don't want to spoil the ending, so I will let you see the film. I think it's important to note that this film was released in 1919, and at that time, Europe, France especially, was at the end of the war. So at that time, the French cinema was mainly based around films centering around the war and war subjects. And so the productions were also declining because the budgets were centered on warfare. And that also meant that American productions were enjoying an enormous success and were actually dominating the screens. Now, these two producers were very aware of that, and they were very keen to modify and to alter that on French cinema. Serge Samburg, who's on the right of this PowerPoint, was actually born in Lithuania, and Louis Nalpas, who was the producer of the film, was born in Turkey. Now, they were wanting to reinstall American-type productions, and they wanted to emphasize quality over quantity in the French filmmaking era of that time. And in 1919, they founded together the studio La Victorine, as it's known today, but was known as Cine Studio back in the day in Nice. Now, in Nice, there were studios with Gaumont and Pathé at the time, but again, they were suffering from a lot of financial hardships because of the war. So I think it's important to talk a little bit about Serge Samburg, because you can see from his filmography here, this is what he actually did at the studios in Nice. He was a very, very entrepreneurial, and he had a big financial impact for the French industry. So he was born, like I said, in Lithuania, at the time Soviet Union, and he was the son of a textile industrialist. So we know that from that he already came from quite a wealthy background. And he did not want to work at all in that industry. He wanted to work elsewhere. And so he convinced his father to let him go and seek his fortune in France. And he met at the Universal Expo in the 19th century, the Pâté Frères. And by meeting the Pâté Frères, he began to work for them, first as a Russian correspondent, in that he would translate correspondence between the two countries. And then at the same time, he would learn and be an apprentice in the studios. The Pathé brothers very quickly understood his potential, and they sent him to Russia in 1902 to build a Pâté Frères branch of their company. Then the war broke out in 1904, and he came back to France, and then they sent him back to Berlin, to Budapest, and to Vienna to there also make Pâté Frères branch in those countries. Then, of course, he moved back to France, and he created on his own, not with Pathé, cinema palaces for the people to be able to screen films. And of those cinema palaces, the Montrouge Palace that you can see on the screen here is actually a Gaumont screening today, and it still exists. But I think what he's also really well known for in France is that he managed to revive production at the Eclair Studios just after the war and well into the 30s. And he's also known for helping launch the Eclair camera in 1920s. So you can see from his background and from this filmography that this is a man who is entrepreneurial, this is a man who's got a background, and this is a man who can carry productions forward. So we can understand why he and Louis Nalpas in the future came together and became this remarkable duo in French film history. So Louis Nalpas was a son of a Turkish merchant, and he was actually working as an exporter and would export foreign films around the Orient with his father for French distributors. And by doing that, he met many different persons and decided to come to France because his real desire was to produce films. So from this, he met two very important people, Charles Delac and Marcel Vandal, who had an extraordinary production company called Le Film d'Art, in which he worked with them on the films that you can see here that I put on the screen. So as you can see, these are not just simple productions, they're productions by Abel Gance, and even though they might not be as Napoleonic as Napoleon, they were still quite big productions. And so you can see that as a producer for these films, he had a vision, and he also had the shoulders to carry a production like Le Sultan de l'Amour just after the war. During the war, actually, Charles Delac and Marcel Vandal had to go and fight, and so they left Louis Nalpas totally in charge as the producer of these films. In 1918, he decided to leave Le Film d'Art because he wanted to create his own company, and he moved to the south of France in Nice, where there were also studios. And he actually decided that he wanted to work on a big production with Pathé, which was called 1001 Nights. Whilst he was in Nice, he absolutely fell in love with this extraordinary garden and villa. It's called Villa Liserbe. And this is what he wanted to use and transform into the studio as a backdrop for his film. At the time he wanted to shoot, he was translating the film with France Toussaint, adapting it for the screen with Pathé, but we don't know at what point they split and at what point Pathé no longer produced the film. But he did meet up with Serge Sandberg, and he would have met with Serge Sandberg many times, I would have thought, on the Abel Gance studios when he was filming with Paris, because Serge Sandberg was very also involved with Eclair. So they met and they spoke and they decided to work together and create the studio, Cine Studio, which had become Studio Victorien in Nice, and to create this super production American style in France on the 1001 Nights. So Serge Sandberg actually bought the rights from Pathé at the time to be able to make the film and give Nalpas the quality and the production that he wanted. Now, what's incredible about this huge gardens is that it became the backdrop for Sultan de l'Amour, because he completely fell in love. And in a letter, he describes it to Sandberg, saying, "It's 14 acres of ground, has palm and olive trees, a lake, caves, a labyrinth, rose gardens, an orange grove, 4 garden pavilions, a farm, and even a tennis court." So it was the perfect setting for Nalpas to be able to create Sultan de l'Amour and give the oriental feel that he wanted for the film. You can see here, there's just a few clips that I wanted to show you of, you can see like how the actual grounds, like on the photo on the left, you can see, you know, it creates this oriental feel. And the photo on the right is one of the pavilions in which they also shoot the actual film. Now, the studios themselves, when they were creating them, they weren't built and they weren't ready, because production started in 1918 and the film was distributed in 1919. It was over like 1 year of filming, which for the time I think was quite reasonable. And so the constructions of the studios were actually going on in parallel to the filming. And so because of that, I'm just going to go back 2 slides. The little house that you can see there on the left of the screen was actually called the Villa Liserbe, and in that house he created, Nalpas created the film lab, the editing suites, and all the technical facilities that they needed to be able to make the film. So this is just little documents that you can see here, where you can see that they created the studio, Cine Studio of Louis Nalpas. And The Sultan de l'Amour was the first film that he actually made under his film production company. What's important in this duo of Serge Sandberg and Louis Nalpas is that Serge Sandberg was the financier. He was the one who brought the money, and he was the one that enabled the production to proceed. And Louis Nalpas was the producer. But so inspired by American film production, Louis Nalpas didn't want to just be the financing manager of the films. He had a different vision, which was very different at the time, for what a producer should be. He did not want the producer just to be that. He actually wanted a creative and artistic role and voice in the film, which Sandberg, of course, validated all his positions. He wrote a letter to Sandberg in 1918, setting out the details of his production program. And he also had clear demands for the creative and artistic aspects that he considered were essential. So he was able to choose the actors that he wanted. He chose the editor, which was his brother. And he also chose the two directors. Now, although he entrusted the direction to Burguet and Charles Burguet and René Le Somptier, they worked directly under his control. And we actually think today that really the direction was Louis Nalpas was the director of the film. It's important and worth mentioning also that during the actual film, and I'm not going to show you a clip because I think you should see it later, he also employed his brother, what we think, his brother Alex Nalpas, who later created another production company where he would film a lot of dance showing Paris fashion. And we think that there's one scene in the film that you will see. There is a dancer that's shot against a black backdrop. And it was a very important dancer at the time. And this became a fashion in France to shoot fashionable films, fashion programs with dance. And so that was something that his brother began, and it became like a pilot, if you want, for what he would do later. In another letter we have a part where Louis Nalpas talks to Serge Sandberg, and he says, "I've given a lot of thought to the best organization to create for the execution of the film. After considering the pros and cons, I fully agree with you on the need for a regular production with the collaboration of several directors, each working under my control on a different genre. Then we'll get better distribution of overheads and a normal return. If you approve my program, I will be able for the year 1919 to give you 2 large artistic films of 2,000 to 3,000 meters each, 4 dramas or dramatic comedies of 1,200 to 1,500 meters each, and 1 large episodic film." So already that was his goal of Louis Nalpas, to work with Serge Sandberg on the studios in Nice that they were creating together. So his idea was to have several directors working under his command, and especially his artistic command, and that he would follow all the productions very closely and be able to create films like they were doing in the United States. He said, "I think Les Mille et Une Nuits," which was 1,001 Nights at the time, will be entirely finished in the course of January. That was actually not the case. The film was finished in the summer of 1919. So there again, it's very interesting because we have different information in that the film began in 1918. It began as a Pathé production, but then Serge Sandberg bought the rights and took over. So what happened in between, I don't have the information. But he goes on to say, "I'm going to adopt the American method for my film, which consists in condensing stories around 2 or 3 characters and choosing as many original backgrounds and characters as possible. In my opinion, the American secret lies in 1, the choice of the performers, who always physically synthesize the character of the role in a perfect way, 2, in the speed in which the action unfolds, and 3, in the impression of life and vigor that emanates from their interpretation." So he was actually able, Louis Nalpas, to choose the actors for this film. And I'm going to briefly introduce each of the actors that we have. So Gaston Meudon, who plays the Sultan, the Qajar, who goes to kidnap, was actually a very important person in the film history of France. He had many roles, and he was also very well known within the art field. There's a portrait of him done by Modigliani at the time. He's somebody who played a lot in Louis Feuillad's films. So he was not an unknown actor when he came into the film. Here you have Marcel Levesque, who was also a very important actor in Feuillad's films. He's known for his roles in Judex and Les Vampires. France Delia was not a known actress before Le Sultan de l'Amour. This was the film that actually created her career. And then we have here Pedrelli, Sylvie and Pedrelli, who we actually don't know what became of him much after this film. He starred in a few films, but he was not as well known as was Gaston Meudon. So these are the main Gaston Meudon, Marcel Levesque were very important figures within the film industry, and they would also manage to carry the film quite a lot. So the film was released in 1919. It was released at the Cercle d'Hiver in Paris, and it was released in black and white. That's actually quite interesting because the film that you are going to see tonight is the colorized version that was done 4 years later. The film was released under the films Louis Nalpas, as you can see actually in the poster of the film at the time. You can see on the bottom right corner of the poster the logo of Louis Nalpas. And then later at a time it was also released by Pathé, and if you look at the screen you can actually see above the cinema screen the Pathé coque of Pathé. So it received an immense revival of French cinema after the First World War, and it was very well received. And the whole idea of this film was to counteract American production that was covering the screens. Laurent Verret, who is a historian, says that the great originality of La Sultane de l'Amour lies in the fact that it embodies modernity of narrative cinema, now dominant, while at the same time bearing traces of what characterized the monstrous attractions of the previous decade. This hybridity, which he integrates into his editing, finds the best expression on two levels of the film. Firstly, with the performance of the dancer Durga that I spoke about just before, and an important figure on the Parisian scene who, seemingly occupying a secular position, actually delivers an exceptional performance. So the film was also an immense success. Did that not work? And I'm going to also read to you, so you can see also the different posters of the film as it was released. There was different versions of the film itself. And one of the first responses from the press was, the effort put into the execution of this film far exceeds anything that has been attempted in France. There's no bluff, no pompous blarney, and no preface in the galamitas. No political or social theories, no dull or boring subtitles. Beauty, truth, and art are the secret of the Sultan de l'Amour's success. In another review, the critiques were equally good, saying Le Somptier and Berger, two aces, directed. Toussaint wrote the play. An outstanding cast performed it. Nice lent its scenery and sunshine. Why did Nalpas sign Le Sultan de l'Amour? Let me put it simply. The opera was built by talented masons, brilliant statuaries, and perfect craftsmen. But it was Garnier who inspired and designed it. So it's to Nalpas that the Sultan de l'Amour owes above all the glory to French film. So we can see that these two producers managed, with their vision of super production at the time, just after the war, were able to create a super production that would also be a great influence to the French film industry and to spectators. In fact, it was so popular. I mean, there's lots of different articles, which I'm not, of course, going to read all of them for you because it would be too long, that Louis Nalpas decided to then make a color version of the film. So because of its success, it took 4 years afterwards to hand paint over 100,000 frames of film. So here you have a picture of Pathé laboratory just outside of Paris, where they would actually do this. And at the same time, he also reduced the film. So the film, when it was first released in black and white, was 2,400 meters. And when he re-released it in 1923, not only was it in color, but he also re-edited the film to 1,800 meters, which is the film that you will be seeing tonight. So for those who don't know, this is just an example of what stenciling is. It's a very long process, and it means that you have to take a film, you have to cut out and make a stencil, and then those stencils for each form or frame that you want to do, and color it in by hand. So it requires manual cutting, and then you have to find the tint that you want to do. Now, usually back in the day when people were actually making stencil prints, they would choose 3 to 6 colors maximum, because it was a very expensive process. Of course, you would have to you would have like a catalog from Pathé in which you can choose your colors, and then you would it would be like a line, as you can see the ladies in the studios who would be sitting down and painting all day long each frame. So like here you can see a cutout of the horse. This is not the actual film Sultan de l'Amour, but you can see that that horse would be applied to every single frame, and one woman would be painting them all. So I've looking, you can see that I just put a few slides here of different stenciled events of the film, and I've counted around 9-10 different colors that they would have used for this film, which again shows the financing that Louis Nalpas managed to find to be able to do this, because this would not have been possible during the war. And it was also something that would have been extremely costly. Like I said, you would pay per color with Pathé. And I took this one on its own because I find it very interesting. You can see where the green overlaps and where it overlays. And I will talk about that a little later when we talk about the restoration process. But you can see that in the film you will see there are various greens. It's not the same green which you would have had a lot in films of that time. What's also interesting was that he also chose to tint film and dye the film before, and then do pochoir, like stenciling, on top of that. So there again, for one particular sequence, which is a battle sequence, you will see that the film is dyed and stenciled over. So there was a different process as well that was added to the film. And then these are just slides that I wanted to show you, because this film has had a continuing success throughout the years. And it's had a lot of critical response. And it's a film that's also been used in many film books of the history in France. Some call it the first color film of France, even though it's not necessarily the case. But it's also been a film that people have used a lot for film education and for schools. And here, this is a collection of film history books, and it's like, I think it's a 70s, 80s collection, and this would have been they dedicated an entire section of the film, 70, 50, 60 years after its actual release. So I'm going to go on to more of my domain, which is restoration. So Before I actually go on and talk about the restoration, it's very important that when you restore a film, you think very carefully of what you have. So we tend to work very closely with historians when it's needed. We have this saying, restoration, remasterization, and restoration. There are three forms of restoring films. The term restoration was coined by the press when in Spain, in a small village, there was a lady who wanted to help mend a mural in a church of she thought the painting was actually fading, and it was a painting of Jesus Christ. And she decided to buy some paint, and she decided to actually try to restore the painting herself. And it created such an outroar because they were saying that the painting that was made was actually resembled, that Jesus Christ no longer resembled Christ, but he resembled more of a gorilla than Jesus Christ himself. And so the whole outroar that was created, and just for out of interest, that was what she did. It shows that restoration cannot be done just by anybody. You need to have a collegial approach of film historians, expert technicians to be able to carry out a restoration. So we, of course, do not want to do a restoration, and we do not do remasterization either. What we call remasterization is when you take a film and you will scan it and digitize it, but you will also change it in a way. So, for example, you will change the colors of the film. You may re-edit the film, or you may put it in a color space that it was never before. So that is what we will call a remasterization. And a restoration for us is where you actually try to put the film back in its original state and show it to the audience as it was shown. So this is what we do when we restore. We try to make the film as close to the original film as possible so that audiences can have a perception of what the audiences at the time will have seen. Now, of course, that's not exactly possible because we're screening digital when the film was in nitrate, and you can't screen nitrate today, but we try to respect that as much as possible by taking into account what the technology was at the time and not trying to over-clean films or to over-stabilize films so that there is still the movement that you would have in a film projector, but also to take into consideration the white point and the white space, because a film projector digital does not have the same white point as a film projector, carbon art projector, or even a xenon lamp projector. So that's very important to take into consideration. So why did we restore this film? The film had been restored many times before. First, there was a 16mm reduction print that was made. And then there was a telecine that was made of the 16mm print for television processes. So first of all, the negative of this film has disappeared. We have no idea where it could be. And also, the black and white version of this film has disappeared. I would assume, what we assume, well, but we don't know, that the black and white, the color prints that we have of this film were originally the black and white ones that were reused and stenciled and for many purposes used as the projection prints. Also, we were not allowed to touch this film due to disputes for right holders between the children and the grandchildren. And because they were arguing over money issues, we were not able to touch the film for 15 years until the film entered the public domain. And of course, the film entered the public domain in 1919, but that was the black and white version. And then the real color version entered public domain in 2023. So you might say, why make another restoration if you already have a reduction 16mm and that's been telecined? Well, the simple factor of that is the technology of the time is not the technology today, and you need to use the technology that you have today to be able to create the most beautiful rendition of the film for future generations. So I'm going to show you a clip. So this was actually a 16 mil. This was actually a telecine of the 16 millimeter version of the film. And what's interesting is that there is a part, there's some black and white here on the title credits, but it may just have been stills that they used, and they for some reason made that as their title cards. We don't know. But you can see on this, if I move a little bit forward, so there you can see, of course, you can see the black and white. I think those are stills that were made. For some reason it says 1917, and why it says that, we don't know. It's interesting to us. But this was a telecine version, and then they say it was recolored in 1923, but actual production of the film didn't start until 1918. So you can see some color versions of this, and then you can see by the quality, if I'm going to just move a little forward. So now this is actually interesting. There's a lot of movement there, which today audiences don't like to see that. And also you can see that this is a telecine of the 16 millimeter version, and it's very possible, and you'll see later, and you'll understand why. The 35 mil prints that we found, the 3 lasting prints, one is at the Toulouse Cinematheque and the other 2 at the French Cinematheque, were all very damaged. And I would assume that they made the 13 mil, so the 16 millimeter, which you can see here on the right side of the screen. You can see perforation damage, and you can see the jumps that it actually makes. And that those jumps are now forever photographed on the 16 millimeter preservation print that was made. It was actually very common back in the day that a lot of archives would make 16 millimeter reduction prints from 35 mil because it would take less space to store, and also because it was cheaper, and then they would get rid of the 35. But luckily, the 35 was preserved, and we were able to actually use the 35 mil for the restoration of this film. And also you can see that the colors on here aren't great. They are actually better on the 16 mil reduction print than what you can see here. But this is a telecine version of the 16 mil, and it's not, of course, very good quality. So you can see why we wanted to go back from the original 35 mil print. So when we're restoring, there are several phases of restoration. And the first one is to look at the physical, the physical state of the film itself. So you can see here that on these photos you can see that there's been perforation damage. You can also see that the film has been ripped and torn apart in some parts, and it's been replaced by film or tape. And this is what we do. So we spend a lot of time actually restoring film physically. Here on this you can see that there's perforations missing, which of course when you're going to scan you need to be able to create those perforations, otherwise you can't put it into a scanner. You can also see possibly more here. So I wanted to show you another thing, but if I go to Word it's probably going to do something weird, so I can show you afterwards. You can see that you've got some kind of stress marks around the perforations. Now, to be able to counteract that, meant that we couldn't scan this one of the prints normally on the scanner, and we actually had to scan it back to front, which meant scanning it from the tails to the head because of the way that the stress was on the perforations. Because by scanning it backwards, the stress was not created, because you have two claws that actually pull the film along on a scanner, and you didn't want that to happen where those stress marks were, so it would happen on the opposite part. You can see it at the top in the middle of the frame. You can see like little claw marks, and that's actually from projection damage of when the film was projected. So when you do that, it means you have to completely flip the entire film backwards and back to front to be able to replay it in normal action mode. So that's quite easy when you've only got 1 or 2 shots to do that, but when you have an entire reel to do that, and when you're scanning in 4K 16-bit TIFF LIN files, it's very, very, for those who are technical and understand, that's a lot of footage, and it took 24 hours for that process to actually happen overnight for each reel. The scanning itself took 1 day per film because we scanned in HDR. We decided to scan in HDR because HDR would give us a scan of the lowlights, the midlights, and the highlights, and it's what would actually help bring out the colors of this film. What was interesting also when we scanned the 3 prints, we had different title cards, and we also learnt that, I'm going to play this title card, hopefully it's going to play. So what we saw was this sensor card in the middle, which is very short. And that was very important to us because the 3 prints that we had, especially the print from Toulouse, was actually shorter than the other 2. And we realized that it actually had been censored. There had been shots that had been taken out. And those shots were these sequences here that you will see later in the film. They were present in the Cinematheque. They were actually present in the Cinematheque version of the film because the Cinematheque de Toulouse actually used the print a lot for educational purposes. And so, of course, they took out the beheading of a woman. They took out the scene of where the prince, the Sultan Malik, beats the princess, and they took out the kiss because they did not want, of course, the children to see that. What's also interesting, I'm just going back 1 slide. If you look at this, you can see that the composition cinematographique was by Louis Nalpas. And so this is what makes us believe that the film was actually really directed by Louis Nalpas, and that René Le Somptier and Charles Bourget, who worked on the film as directors, were directly under the control of Louis Nalpas. It was an indication to us. Also, the 3 prints, they also had different title cards. And that also was very interesting for us. And it also tells you the life and the story of the film. It tells you that there must have been several prints made and distributed at different times of the French film history. They were probably not all made at the same time. Underneath, you can see what we have is the resolved timeline. So what we do when we scanned the 3 entire prints of the film, we make a comparison between each and every single shot to decide which is the longest, which has the less physical damage, and also which are the ones that have the most interesting colors and which are the ones we're going to restore for the film. So we did that for every shot. So you can see here the colors are different. Now, we don't know if that, well, we assume that some of that is due to fade, but we also think that maybe they didn't use exactly the same dyes all the time. Here again, you can see that the coat on the right side is pink, but it's not been painted on the one on the left. And then again, here you can see it's the battle scene that you will see. The colors are different. And so, but each print was scanned exactly the same. So that tells us a lot about the actual processing of stenciling at the time. You see that even though they would have been done probably around the same time, they probably weren't done by the same person, or maybe that day they didn't have the same inks, or it was different inks that they were using. One of the things that are also important for us when we are restoring films, and in this particular case I'm going to show you a clip. It's very, very short, so I will replay it for you. This was a sequence that had disappeared on a lot of film, on the 3 prints, and on this particular one, that's all that we had. And so I'll try and see if I can play it again. And you can see that at one point he goes black, and there's just you only get like a faint idea that he's there, because you can kind of make out the red of his skirt, but you can't see the rest of him, and that's actually nitrate decomposition. And so for us as an archive, we decided to actually remove this entire little sequence, and to remove out the black, because we thought that, you know, even though we're not supposed to remove film, that to have those black frames, and it was only like a few frames within the sequence, this would actually take you out of the film. And for us, it's important as an archive that audiences are able to stay within the film and not have like this jump cut and say what's going on. Even if there are jump cuts, that's fine. But at this particular point, we thought that the decomposition of that actual clip wouldn't actually give anything to the film. It wasn't telling anything to the story. We see him in, we see him out. We get the sense that it's disappeared. So those are also parts of the restoration. In total, it took us 6 months internally to do this restoration. A lot, and the majority of that time was actually spent physically repairing the film. And then a lot of that was scanning, and then a lot of was the comparison work. And then we spent 2 full months with 2 persons restoring it. And of course, I'm going to show you a clip here. And you can see on this clip, you can see that there's dirt, you can see like flicker that is happening. That's what we decided to take out. You can see black dirt, black dust. It's like a white flash that you get. It was important for us to be able to take those out, and to be able to not over-restore where there are scratches, but just to take out dirt that can affect the screening of the film and the actual lecture. So this is just a before and after print that we did. A few clips that we wanted to show you of the before and after. The film in itself, apart from the physical damage, the image in itself didn't have that much damage to it. There was dirt, there was dust, there were tears that, of course, we repaired. The hardest part is that when you're restoring this film, is because of the stenciling. If you look at her jewels, you never have the same color for each frame. So when you're actually going to restore this kind of film, you have to be extremely careful that you don't alter the color. And also, you could see the sky just before that. I can play it for you again if you need. You can see here, there was a lot of dirt and mold. All this that you're seeing in the sky is mold and dust and dirt. So that, of course, we wanted to restore. When you're restoring that, taking out flicker, dust, dirt, and mold, it can be quite damaging to film. And on this kind of film where you have stenciling, you have to be very, very careful with the parameters that you're going to use, because, like I just said before, you don't have one frame that has the exact color. And so you need to be very careful of how you can see here. Oh, it doesn't want to do it. So you can see that you have to choose very fine parameters so that the colors and you don't affect or try to change. And also you have to be careful, because you can create artifacts by actually getting rid of color. So this is just to show you a before and after. And then I'm going to show you what we do as an archive. So for all the films that we do what we call a carnet de restauration, which is like a workbook, and we document everything that we do. So we try to find posters, and then we talk about the film in itself, the aspect ratio of the film speed of it, what it was like, what we have and what it's the state of it is, and we photograph the cans that they're in, and also identification process. And then we do comparisons. We look and we see what was the damage that was done. So here you can see physically the film had quite a bit of damage. Each of the prints, it all needed to be entirely repaired before we could actually scan. And that in itself is a long process. This particular section of the film had probably gone off the projector, and so was considerably ripped. And it took a good few days to repair that entire section, and then to be able to scan it and restore it. And we also compare. You can see here there's a comparison that's made between two different prints of the same shot, and we try to look already what seems to be in better shape and what is in a better quality, what is longer. So these are just examples of, reparations that we've done. This was like a rip, a tear of the film, and then we repaired it here by adding black so that we would actually be able to scan it. And it's a very, very laborious process. So yeah, and then in total, so we can see, like, for example, 20 hours for one roll, for example, and the total amount that we've had to do for each roll. So we document all of this so that for future generations they know exactly what was done to the history of the film. So there again you have like a rip that was actually done, that we of course restored and repaired. And then we do this for every single roll. And then this is also given to the person who is going to scan the film so that they know that they have to be extremely careful and for how they're going to scan. And then we, for every restoration, we also talk about what we do afterwards. We talk if we're going to do what quality control, how we've cleaned it, if it's developed, if we make a film print afterwards, after this, if it's been projected, have we checked it after it's been projected, etc., etc. So there's a thorough processing of actually being able to watch the following the whole restoration process of the film. So that is about all I have to really say about the film. I think it's like 1 hour. So if anybody has any questions about the process.
Maybe I have the first question, if I may. It's very interesting and important for me to see how much research was done before the restoration started, because we are lack of people, we are lack of time, and we usually don't have this time. So to make all this is not a question, this is just a comment. So
you mean the physical of the three comparisons, or the actual historical?
Not just the physical, to make all research about the film, if we have some documentation about the developing of, I don't know, screenplay, and all this around. We have a lot of documents, but we don't have enough time and people to make make a research.
But that's the same for us. We actually didn't do that part because we don't have the time to do that. That was actually done by film historians who actually they worked with us. They teach at the university at the Paris Sorbonne, and they were actually very interested in the film, and they had a whole colloque about films from 1908 to 1919, and this was the last film for them that they wanted to talk about because it was such a different film production at the time. And so they did a lot of research of what they could find, but we personally don't have the time to do that when you're restoring.
Okay, so we should connect with the schools. So
okay, so thank you very much, Simone. This was really interesting, and actually it's like we don't have enough time because it would be interesting to go even more in depth, but then, okay, we will see the film and we will understand. I have two questions. One, you were saying that only 3 positive prints existed, so you worked with all those 3?
We worked with all 3. So the film that you're going to see tonight is a combination of the 3 prints, because as I showed you on the clips where you have the resolve, you have the 2 frames side by side.
But this then the information, like how can, even like in France, that is like really one of the countries that is on cinema, is like the most advanced, and also in terms of history and tradition, like the negative is lost. So this research was made thoroughly, and actually it's like you contacted all the archives around the world, or?
No, we haven't contacted all the archives around the world because we didn't have a very big time frame to do this, and we knew that there were 3 prints that were available. So we didn't try to find out where the negative was, and the negative would not really have been much help because it would have been black and white. And because it's a print, and it was the color print that we wanted to restore, because the colors are very important for this film, it was this that we actually wanted to do. So it was important for us to have those 3 prints and to actually have that as a starting point. And so the majority of the work was preparing them for scanning and then doing the comparison, the digital comparison for the length editorially, to see what's different and then see what parts are missing. And so what we would do was just reconstruct the film. Every part that was missing, that had been censored and that was in the Toulouse print, we put back into that. So and those parts were available in the 2 prints at the Cinémathèque Française.
Okay, the last one for me, talking about colors, we saw this nice photo of the colorists at that time, and they were all female.
Yeah.
With only one man with a hat just controlling what they're doing, probably. How is it today? Like with you, with your team, it's like you are 10, 15 people, you were saying?
So in the actual lab, no, it's actually, we have a female digital restorer and we have a male digital restorer. And it was a boy and a girl who actually, man and woman, who did the restoring of that film. And as colorists, we're mixed team. We have equal, we're in parity for man, women.
And now I'll pass it. Just the discussion about choosing the right color.
Yeah.
How much was this important, and how many people were kind of taking this decision?
Mainly myself and the colorist. And what we do is that we have the fact that we've scanned this in Lin TIFF, the color, because the print, for the technical people out there, a film print has a linear curve to it. So you want to be able to reproduce that when you're scanning it. And so we scanned it in TIFF to have the linear curve, which means that you're pretty much representing the color as much as possible and as close to the print as possible. Bearing in mind that the colors on the film print they're actually a lot richer than what you're going to see here, because film scanners today are actually made for new film. So the red, green and blue LEDs that you do to actually digitize film do not see all the colors that you actually have on the film, so you will never really see the film as it was seen.
Yeah, and on nitrate even more, right?
Yeah.
So some technical specifics, or anybody wants to comment, or? Yeah, I'm surprised. Carpo is not having any.
In my department, I have 6 restorers. 3 are dedicated to film restoration and actual film preservation, restoration, analog, and 3 are dedicated to digital. Out of the 3 dedicated to digital, that includes the person that does the color grading. But they overlap. You know, we have different. In the lab itself, we have different roles. So one of the roles is to restore. Another role is to give access. So we don't use the same scanners for access. We use scanners that are quicker and more gentle with the film. And then we also have a role of preservation photochemical, because film is still the only medium today that will last for hundreds of years, and in which you will be able to unroll and say, oh, this film is such and such, because you can see an image. I mean, you can pick up this computer in 300 years, probably won't even open. So you can have a hard drive and you can't open it in 5 years. So how do you save your film digitally? So it's a big discussion that we're having. Of course, digital is not for long-term preservation, but we are looking for ways. What is the medium possible should film cease to exist. But you know, digital is digital, but it's the actual medium. What do you put digital files on? Right now we're using tape, but tape it has a shelf life of around 35 to 50 years. And also the problem with tape is that you have to keep migrating to be able to read it in the following years. So that's an immense problem that archives are faced with, because one, ecologically it's not as green as you would think, because it's a lot of plastic and magnetic tape. When you're migrating, you need to make sure that you're not losing any data. And then also you have to be also sure that, you know, that there are no problems when you're actually recording the data onto the tape, and there's nothing that's corruption. There's no corrupt files that happen. And also you want to make sure that it's in an open format so that you can reread it. We've had films that have been done for us and we're not able to open them anymore.
So now,
so if I understood well, you are 6 in your department.
Yes.
And if
for in-house restoration.
Yes, for in-house, but you also put some projects out. How many projects you put out to work?
Oh, a lot. So I have 3 people who are dedicated to outsourcing work, in which they will follow the entire process. But we have what we call 5 tenders that we send out. So the first of the 5 tender is what we call chemical treatment. So this is what we give out to one particular person if we have film and mainly sound, magnetic sound, that's so vinegar, has so many problems, that we have one last try of putting something chemical onto the sound so that we can just digitize it and hear something. Or you could have also a film that has a lot of vinegar syndrome, you're losing emotion, and this person will try to stick the emotion back onto the support, and you scan it once. And you know you're going to destroy the film, and you know the chemicals that the person is using is probably not the best for long-term heritage, but because you're going to destroy the film anyway, it's your last bet, and it's your last chance. So as an archivist and a preservist, you want to try that. The second tender that we have is for photochemical preservation. So it's not really restoration, because you're actually making a copy. You're photographically copying the negative or the print, if that's what you've got, onto another photographic medium. So all the scratches, all the tears that you have will be photographed onto that print. But you're going from a film medium like nitrate or acetate that, you know, that will deteriorate over time to something that's polyester and that is long-term preservation. Because, like I said at the beginning, we have like 140,000 titles, which is over 1 million film cans. I can't restore that in my lifetime. You know, we will never do it. And so you have to have a policy in place where you say, okay, anything that's unique, and by unique we mean it doesn't have a duplicate. So it means it's an original negative that's never had a print, or an original negative that's never had an intermediate as a safety net, or only a print that exists because no negative exists anymore, and it's one print and there are no other prints. We decide to make a carbon copy, if you want, onto polyester so that you can preserve it. And then we can also say, okay, we can scan this at a later date, because it's possible that film that is that's unique in 10, 15, 20, 50 years time, we can't scan it because it's too deteriorated. So it's very important for us that there is a copy that you can scan at some point in time. The third tender that we have is what we call digital restoration tender. So those are films that we will scan, and we will have them digitally cleaned up like we've done on the Sultan de l'Amour. And if we have the budget, we will ask for that film then to be put back onto film, so we have a preservation of that. And then the fourth tender we have is just scanning of the legal deposit. Since the 70s, and the French film government decided that every single film that was screened in France had to be deposited, just like every single book that's published is deposited at the library, or every film print that would have been screened in France needed to be deposited at the CNC archive. But a lot of those films, nobody's ever seen them, so we scan them for researchers so that they can see them at the National Library. And then we have the final tender, which is for sound, so where we just digitize a lot of magnetic sound that we have, or restore, because we do not do sound in-house, so we can only work on images. So what we do is that we send the sound out for films to be restored, if the film, of course, is not a silent movie. In total, for the legal deposit, we do about 400 prints that we scan per year for that. That's outsourced. But those are only HD. And for film restorations, this year's actually been a very good year, and we've sent out, because there's a retrospective of Abel Gance right now going on at the Cinémathèque Française, so we sent out 4 Abel Gance films to be restored, features. And before that, we sent out another feature film to be restored about rugby for the opening of the Olympic Games. So that's 5. And then we also sent out quite a few shorts and a Jean Labougette film. So I think in total about 10 films that we sent out to be restored this year.
Just another question. In average, how much do you pay for the restoration outside?
Well, because we have a tender, they have to give like a special price. So a restoration, depending on the damage of the film, of course, can vary from 30,000 if it's not very damaged to 70,000 to 90,000 euros, depending on the length of the film as well. And that's the same also price that because the CNC also gives subsidies to films. So we have what we do in-house as an archive and what we outsource to represent and support the industry. And then we also, as the French Film National Film Centre, we also provide subsidies to catalogists and rights holders so that they can restore their films and create access for the wider audiences. And that's done by subsidy, and you have to submit a file, and you need to explain, you know, why this film is important, what's the cultural heritage of this film, why you need to restore it, and why what is your distribution going to be for that film. And so when you do that, and of course attached to that you have to have the price. We need a quote. And so I analyze those quotes by the film and the state of the film, saying, okay, that price is good or it's not good. And so we tend to say that those films, again, depending on if it's nitrate or if it's acetate, because it's not the same restoration process, they vary. The average price today in France is around 80,000 euros for a film restoration with a return to film. And if it's without a return to film, it's around 50 to 60,000.
Thank you.
A boš kdo zdajle, mogoče, ko se je malo odprlo?
It's about 1,000, was it like between 800 to 1,000 a minute. Really.
Simone, one important question as well. I think you presented the importance of this specific film, Sultanka de l'amour, for French film history, but also like world film history. The film is available on the platform from the French Cinémathèque Henri, named after Henri Langlois, that they started during COVID, during the pandemic.
Yeah.
But do you know, or actually, it's where it was premiered, this restored version? Was it like a big gala premiere because of the importance of the film, or not at all?
What did we do? I can't remember. What did we do? Because there's been a lot, actually. So I think we premiered it. Because also why did we restore it also? I don't know if I remember if I said that. It was the 100 years of this film. And so there was this colloque that they were doing. I don't know how you say that. There's like a whole group of people, like film historians, that were talking and were editing a book from the films of 1908 to 1918. And this was one of the films that was part of the colloque. And so we screened that actually at the CNC theatre in Paris, in Raspail, because we wanted to screen it where it had originally been screened in Paris, but of course we couldn't do that. And there was a screening that was dedicated for film professionals, historians at that point. But then also the Cinémathèque de Toulouse screened it. They screened it in Nice, of course, and it's actually travelled quite a lot in different festivals in France since.
Okay, and last question, really, because then we go out to come back. Did you, in the research, find out if there was a musical score composed? Because, like, we know that for some silent films of the era, there was scores being circulating then to the cinemas that were showing.
Didn't find anything.
No?
No.
And also no information about how it was.
No.
What the sound of, usually it was like a piano, probably, or.
We have no information on that.
Okay.
But it's also what's interesting from the historians that did a lot of research. We have like Louis Nalpin was actually working with Pathé on this film at the beginning, and then at some point Pathé stopped the production of this, and it was Serge Sandberg who took over, and they built the studios to make this happen. Even though the studios weren't ready, they were working next to it. But why and how and when, I don't know. I don't have that information, but we would assume that, you know, because it's the war, it was after the war, it was just 1918. Pathé had financial difficulties at that point in the studios, and so, you know, Serge Sandberg, who we saw, it was an incredible figure and very entrepreneurial, and Louis Nalpin also had a very big vision of what production should be, and in their letters, you can see that that they made quite a remarkable duo together to be able to make these big productions. And they made several big productions after that film, and that he would also control artistically. So at what point, we don't know.
Okay, nothing anymore. Simone, thank you very much, and let's meet back in a little bit more than half an hour. Thank you.
Thank you.